Hi, it's Cindy from the Osterville Library, and today we have a great opportunity to talk with an expert in the field of meteorology. Today we have Todd Glickman. He has spent over 40 years on the radio in Boston in one of the largest markets with CBS Radio, and he is currently at MIT. He's also served on the board of the American Meteorological Society, and we're thrilled to have you with us today. So welcome, Todd.
Thanks, great to be with you.
Okay, so most good things kick right off. I remember Hurricane Bob on the Cape. We're in hurricane season now. Supposedly they've gone through a lot of names on tropical storms and all that. So it seems like we get one every 10 or 15 years. What's your opinion on what's coming up?
Well, I think a good thing to start talking about is the relative frequency of really tough hurricanes. And think about this. Let's say it's Friday evening and you decide you and your family or your friends want to go out to eat. And you think about going to a restaurant that maybe has 50 seats. And you're saying to yourself, I wonder if it's going to be crowded today. Okay. So you made the decision to go to the restaurant on your own. And dozens, if not more than dozens of people also made a decision to go out to eat or not to go out to eat. And if they did decide to go out to eat, maybe to go out to the same restaurant you decided to go to. And all of those decisions were made independently. None of the people talk to each other. And the atmosphere works in much the same way. There are a lot of independent things going on that have to come together to make a crowded restaurant, or to make a very busy hurricane season, or to make a lot of strong storms want to come close to the coast. Remember, you can have a very busy hurricane season with 25 or 30 named storms, and if none of them come close to the coastline, then you say, well, this wasn't anything. But if it was a very light season with respect to the number of hurricanes, but one or two are very, very strong and came close to or hit the coastline, say, boy, it was a bad hurricane season.
Right. Yeah.
So we've got all of those things in play. And each season, we can look at some of the ingredients that could potentially make it a more active season than another. Has to do with the sea surface temperature and the position and the strength of the jet stream and a lot of other things. This particular season looks as though it's going to be active, and so far it is bearing that out, where we're up to the K storm, I think, already, and there are a couple of more systems out there which could develop in the next couple of days. So you put that on the side and you say, okay, which of them is going to strike Cape Cod? We don't know. We do know this: if you look back in history, and past performance is no guarantee of future performance, right? But if you look back in history, we note that early in the hurricane season, which peaks around mid-September, it's more likely the Gulf of Mexico and the southeastern US that will be impacted. Later in the hurricane season, it's more likely the East Coast and perhaps the Northeast could be impacted. So the probability of something coming close to the Cape late in the season, September, October, November, is higher than earlier in the season. So from that perspective, we still have much of the potentially active season in front of us.
That's very interesting. And that was a great analogy on the restaurant. It kind of puts it in a better perspective. Because I know some of these storms seem like they just, sometimes you get these 2 weeks notice that a hurricane or a storm is coming. And sometimes the worst ones just appear out of nowhere and here in a day or two. So it's, yep, you never know. You never truly know. So some people,
I was just going to add the computer guidance that we use today, now that we're in the 2020, is much, much better than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago when Bob struck in 1991 or Edna back in 1954. So back then, we used to have to wait for them to be seen by satellites or airplanes that are flying, or even before satellites by ships. But these days, we have computer numerical models, or guidance as we call it, that can alert us to potential formation even before they do. And probably the greatest example of a huge success story was Hurricane Sandy back in 2012, whereby Hurricane Sandy was picked up by the numerical models a week in advance. And as we got closer to the event that was impactful in the northeastern part of the United States, the models became better in agreement and more accurately depicting what was going to happen. I was working at WCBS in New York City then. I think I did almost 30 hours straight on the radio because that storm took a track that we were taught couldn't happen. It was virtually impossible. whereby it would come up the coast and make a left turn and go into the Jersey shore, and then the counterclockwise sweep, if you will, would push the water into lower Manhattan, and lower Manhattan was inundated with 4 feet of water and all the destruction there. Here in southern New England, southeastern New England, the impacts were much less, of course, but that is something we knew with great specificity very early on. Now, we're not so lucky with those forecasts all the time, but hopefully we get much better in the future.
And I think they're still recovering from that storm, that hurricane in there. Because I remember the pictures. That was almost surreal. Because the way New York flooded, I've seen, the Seaport area in Boston flood similarly, not nearly as bad, but yeah. So most people sometimes believe that we can't get above a hurricane force 1 or on the Cape or something. We could easily get a 2 or a 3 or higher, could we, or not? Because
of course.
It's colder, or
sure. It happened in 1954. Both Carol and Edna were Category 3 storms, and again, it's all those ingredients that have to come together. It's a very rare event, and predicting rare events is exceedingly difficult. It can't be done until you have the events in front of you that you're looking at. In other words, I can't tell you there'll be a Category 3 6 weeks from now, because we just don't know. The atmosphere hasn't even come together to the point where it could potentially form something that could do that. But it can happen. Predicting rare events, again, is difficult because, well, let's put it this way. People talk about the so-called 100-year storm. Okay, that means the long-term average. So take 1,000 years, the 100-year storm will typically happen 10 times, right? But that doesn't mean you can't have the 100-year storm 2 years in a row, or even twice in the same season. Okay, you may then go for decades without having one. And then, is the 100-year storm the right title to apply to something, because conditions are changing because of climate change and other things, which could make that particular kind of weather situation more or less frequent in the future. And we don't even know about that yet.
It's very interesting. So are there any other things that we should keep an eye out on in the weather world?
Well, we're in a bit of a drought here in southern New England right now. Again, this has been going on for, 4 or 5 months. I think the deficit of rain on average is running 6 to 8 inches in many places. At this time of year, you tend to not get the day-long soaking rains, which can alleviate something like that. You get more the pop-up thunderstorms, which for 30 minutes will dump an inch or 2 of rain in one location. And the problem with that is it all tends to run off. Okay, it floods away, it goes down into the sewers or wherever strong rainwater falling will go, and it doesn't get a chance to soak into the ground. In the fall, we tend to get the kinds of weather systems that will produce a slower, steady rain, which have the opportunity to sink in to the ground. So my hunch is, unless we get a lot of these heavy thunderstorms, many days in a row, we're probably not going to see a change in that deficit of rainfall for another couple of months.
And I know people always like to know, what's the winter going to be like? Is it possible to even know what the winter is going to be like? If we're going to have a lot of snow or storms, or, the Farmer's Almanac always comes out with their prediction.
Well, I tell you what, you tell me what the stock market's going to do next January, and I'll tell you what the weather's going to do.
Okay, that sounds very reasonable.
It just can't be done.
Right.
Now, the Farmer's Almanac is great for its gardening tips and the phases of the moon and the tides and the sunrise and sunset. But other than that, it's fiction.
Well, that's good to know. Any other little weather tidbits or history on the hurricanes or Cape Cod, or anything you'd like to add?
Well, let me just sum up. I think today is National Radio Day. Something exactly. I didn't know. I went to the store. I couldn't find a Hallmark card for it, but so be it. There was a very famous radio disc jockey back in the 70s. His name was Wolfman Jack.
I remember Wolfman Jack.
I can't imitate him. He had a very coarse voice, but he had this great saying, which really sticks with me. Some like it cold, some like it hot. Here comes the weather, whether you like it or not. And the moral of that story is that over the last number of decades, we have gotten much better about forecasting the weather the next 5, 6, 7 days. But while meteorology may be an exact science, predicting the future is not. And once you get past 7 to 10 days, there's just so much chaos in the atmosphere that it's virtually impossible to predict what's going to happen. Rather, occasionally we can come up with some longer term trends, like we do know about this hurricane season. We think it's going to be very active. But next winter, who knows?
Right.
So the key is stay tuned to your local radio station or TV station, where the professionals, those that are certified by the American Meteorological Society, are looking at the data, they're studying the data, they're compiling, and they're putting it together, and they give you the best information that they possibly can.
And I think on that note too, is add to it is to follow the directions and the leads that are presented. If you need to evacuate, evacuate. If you do see the, the rising water, turn around, and to have supplies in your house to be ready and have an evacuation plan, especially on the Cape. We always wonder about the bridges and everybody if they ever had to leave, but it's very important. I'll never forget with the hurricane that was in Miami years ago. What was the name of that one? That hit
Andrew,
Miami?
maybe?
Yes, that I remember all the parties and stuff people were having with
Mm-hmm.
the Andrew, the hurricane party, and then it ended up to be totally devastating, and a lot of people ended up losing their lives and things like that, that you really need to take, even though whatever happens, you just really need to be prepared and have a plan.
Yeah, and just to tie this all together, the season of Andrew, was that an active or a non-active season? One of the least active seasons in the Atlantic Basin. Fewer storms than typical. But one of them got really strong, really bad, and did a lot of devastation. So when the predictions of an active season come out, that doesn't mean you're going to have a problem. Or if the prediction of a less than active season comes out, that doesn't mean you won't.
Well, this has been great, Todd. I really appreciate your time today, and I've learned quite a bit. And I thank you for spending the time with us this morning.
My pleasure. Be safe.
Okay, you too.